up on the report. We did two kinds of research, which is qualitative and quantitative. For quantitative, quickly, qualitative is basically talking to people, getting subjective opinions and subjective ideas about the topic on hand. Quantitative is a measure of is measuring across the boards. Anand will explain it a little bit more in just a minute. So we started off with a few broad hypotheses on how to go about these, and we set up interviews with experts. We set up focus group discussions where we discussed these hypotheses. We asked respondents to talk about how they deal with privacy concerns within their own organizations, what sort of budgetary or other support they get, what sort of concerns overweigh privacy concerns, what sort of organization structure and culture plays a part in doing privacy, building privacy into products and services. And we use this to refine the hypotheses at a later stage. And because it was COVID pandemic 2020 version 1 of the COVID pandemic, we did this all online, and we recorded the interviews and transcribed it, and we analyzed it for insight. So as we spoke to people, we realized a bunch of things. One, that we started off by thinking that we should talk to junior employees and middle management. We realized that we had to shift our focus a little higher, because that's where the policy decisions are being taken, and that is where goals of the organizations are being set and budgetary allocations are made. So we shifted our focus, therefore, based on these research, based on these conversations that we were having. We moved our focus a little bit. We spoke to start talking to middle and above executive management, senior management, to see what that conversation was like. And based on this, we developed a quantitative survey. We can share this link in a little while. So based on these hypotheses, we had a set of 20 questions we were asking initially, and then we refined that a little. We added and expanded on that. We came up with a survey of 32 questions that covered both personal and professional information and practices and attitudes towards privacy. Why caste and gender is a question that has been asked before when we were doing the research. There's a detailed section on the caste angle in privacy requirements, but largely caste forms identity in an Indian context, and identity is a determining factor in privacy needs, and caste therefore plays a role in what sort of information one is able to, one is willing to give or willing to reveal about oneself, and that's a factor in privacy questions. And who gets to ask these questions, and who gets to reveal, and who gets to hide, and who needs to hide, are things that we need to talk about, and that's part of the privacy conversation. Details are up on the Hasgeek website, and we can discuss that later. We also, Anand, do you want to take over from here?
You can explain the confidentiality part, and then I'll go from there.
Okay. So yes, we very clearly said that none, especially because this is a survey about privacy, but also in generally that all respondents will be guaranteed their anonymity. Nothing that they say will be used against them or revealed to the world. We added a ethical statement and a confidentiality agreement at every stage of the interview, disclosing who is running the research, who are the supporters and sponsors of the project, and what sort of information is being collected. We believe this is the best way to both stay true to the spirits of privacy, also to make sure that the survey itself is not biased in any way. Anand?
You can stop the screen share and I will just do mine.
Yeah.
Can you just stop the screen share?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Okay, I'll go from here. So I will just go over some of the survey design and review. So what we got was basically an initial set of hypotheses, like what Nadika explained, and those are pretty raw. And then we had to frame it into 11 different hypotheses. And then we also went back and have to check first with our external review team if these hypotheses are making sense as practitioners. And then once it was approved as an external review team which said, yeah, these hypotheses make sense, then we went and wrote a bunch of questions that in our opinion proved or disproved the hypothesis. And these were also there were also feedback on sector specific mechanisms and uh, crosscuts and setting expectations and all. And the other thing that we got was the amount of time it took for us to design the survey. Because of the nature of COVID and all, earlier it is not possible for you to do physical. It was basically only an online survey because that is the best we could do about it. And so the baseline with the online surveys is that the drop-off rate is quite high. So we were advised not to create more than 10 questions, 10 minutes. So there is quite a bit of things that we had wanted to ask, but those were cut down in order to fit into the 10-minute routine. Okay, moving forward. So how did we reach the respondents? Just to put things in perspective, most Hasgeek runs a large conference, has large conference properties. And so most of the respondents were people who were already known and who come and speak in these conference circuits, either come and speak in these conference circuits or people who come and attend these conferences. And so that is basically the reference database that we had. And so most of the initial responses were collected by reaching out to people from our professional and personal networks, as well as sharing on hasgeek.com and social media. And so that is how it has been done. So moving forward. The interesting thing about what we did with the analysis is that it was based on a modification of the people process technology framework that companies typically use. And so the reason for using an existing framework and slightly modifying it is because it provides a solid frame for us to think through it. Because at the end of it, the survey is supposed to be more inward looking into the companies than consumer facing. So what we did was we just took the people process technology framework which companies use for uh, identifying development budgets or identifying budgets and decision making, and then use that to see if their internal processes and technology practices has privacy in built in. So one way in which you can think about the PPT, a modification of PPT, is that while companies have business goals and hence the intent need not be stated, which is making profit, with respect to privacy, it's slightly different. There are very few companies that do privacy as a product, but mostly it is an internal org cost unit. And hence we have to measure intent, and intent is basically the top decision makers coming and saying that, look, we want to do something about it. It is as simple as that. Of course, it has to be supported with budgets and hiring people and developing the products, technology products, or buying and incorporating them. But that is basically what formed the framework in which most of these questions were asked, and it also formed the way in which I had analyzed it. Okay, the other thing is, so a couple complete list of all the questions that we had asked, the tables, the rows, the column, individual responses, and all the hypotheses, the individual hypotheses. All that is available on the Hasgeek on the link, which will be shared, which is already shared with Nadika, or if not, we can share it towards the very end. It is now a public website, so you can just go through it at depth. Some part of the raw data may also be available very soon, because just clearing all the PII in order to ensure that it can't be reverse engineered, because we have confidentiality clauses with most of the people who answer these questions, as some of them are pretty intrusive. So the first and the foremost thing that we keep seeing again and again is everyone has intent. I mean, there is a very small sample set, probably less than 5-6% are the ones who come back and tell us that, look, privacy is not something that we want to care about internally. At almost every level, every organization, and every role, people seem to have this thing saying that privacy is a fundamental right and we want to do something about it. We want to develop products that respect it, and so on and so on. However, as we constantly keep seeing that specialized personnel budget and processes and community resources are where the problems are. So if you look at the cross segment that we had found out, large organizations, which are typically $100 million plus or more than 100 employees and so on, typically do well with it, relatively speaking, than small and medium organizations, because they don't have personal budget and processes and community resources. I mean, all these four areas, they lack significantly compared to large organizations. And so what we come back and figured out is, so this gap exists in India. I mean, there's no denying it, and it is not going to go away. So all these four things have to be available in abundance if these organizations, transition towards a data production regime. I mean, that gap is pretty self-evident. And the next thing that because of the way in which there is a significant capacity problem at every level in small and medium organization, we actually recommend, as part of the survey, if to the JPC and DPA, which when it comes to it, we'll go and tell them that what if they have to learn one thing from the survey, it is that they really need a lot of time and support and capacity in order to bring the PDP, in order to be compliant with the PDP. So what we can come back and see is that, look, they have to exempt to some level and also provide support for these small organizations to bring their processes up to speed. Because if they are not giving that support and instead come back and tell them that they have to comply, I don't think there exists any capacity within this organization to comply. As we had discussed in earlier panels, even the Data Privacy Engineering Conference that went that just concluded in a session with other panelists, there is a large scale agreement about the fact that there has to be a threshold limit, and support has to be given in terms of putting out processes, procedures, and a lot of other community resources to bring them into the requirements of the PDP, and without which they are not going to be able to comply to the PDP well, if and when it comes to it. The other interesting thing that the survey also recommends, based on data that we have, is that there also, I mean, there are quite a few technical moving blocks when it comes to complying to privacy regulations. We had seen a whole bunch of them and read through them in the last week. And it's kind of very difficult if those blocks are still moving and for people to comply. So what it really means is that they have to come back and evolve these technical standards, both by taking community input and from within the companies, in order to address gaps in the product development lifecycle when it comes to building privacy features. And so without investing on community resources, again, this is not gonna happen for most of the companies. The third thing that we are also coming and telling is that in order to address these gaps, they need journeyman documentation. Journeyman documentation is what we call in industry as, look, there have been people who have been on this path before, and they had done mistakes, they had failed, and it is far easier for you to learn from them compared to anyone else. So these are things that need to be put out in the public domain, and it has to be actively supported. Only then these gaps are going to be resolved. I mean, apart from the budgetary problems. I mean, without this is the without this is quite hard for us to go anywhere else. The other thing that we also want to warn as part of the survey is that um, most of these organizations that we had talked to in India, which are what we call small and medium enterprises, actually have global ambitions also. They also want to go abroad, and they want to, be a multinational company at a certain scale. So while it is easier for people to come back and say, let's provide a very simplistic solution that reduces the cost of compliance for PD people uh, within a short frame, that would be self-defeating because the sheer lack of capacity means that any non-thought out and easy to use process like a shortcut would get widespread adoption because it is how it is. I mean, since they don't have capacity to do a lot of innovation. But if they take it, they have to pay a longer price when they basically scale out of the country for doing business elsewhere. And so this is something that has to be borne in mind when technical standards are put out. In the sense that just try to be in alignment with global practices, thinking about other regulations and geographies, and just not think about PDP itself. And we also make some clear recommendations for investors and stakeholders. One is that try to build capacity by contributing a shared knowledge pool beyond the organizations. Because if you don't do that, see, privacy is a pretty new evolving field for most of these organizations. And so if it is not done, the common repository of knowledge would not evolve, and there would be a lot of organizations that would be hampered, not just internally, but also externally. The other thing that we'll come back and tell you is please encourage practitioners to gain public recognition for their work. And so if you understand why we are saying that, both in the survey and both in the qualitative studies, it's very clear that there's a lot of interesting work that is happening inside the companies. And we have seen quite a few of them come in the data privacy conference also. But there is a lot of reluctance to put out this knowledge out there, thinking that maybe an IP involved, maybe there's an IP problem, or maybe there is some confidentiality thing involved. So it takes a lot of effort for this knowledge to come out. But when you actually look at them, most of them do not have any IP. They're just basically best practices. So if companies want to evolve a better technology ecosystem, just not for them, but at the community level, I think it is imperative that they encourage practitioners in the company to come and present the work, and also think about privacy at both product and engineering level. And the other interesting, we have found quite a few of these interesting privacy ideas and implementation, which are working implementation as part of the data privacy conference. And so hence the next recommendations that we would be putting them out, and also showing it as a showcase of how to get these things done at a high level for everyone else. Okay. So if you look back, just the full report along with detailed findings and reviews is available on this website in the Hasgeek Privacy Mode webpage. You might please read, comment, and give us feedback. We would be happy to respond to these. And finally, who are the people who actually did it? So Narika did most of the writing. I did some of the quant, and Zainab did all the reaching out the parties and getting people to sign up and do the work, apart from other things. Kiran did most of the editing if in the last 1 month in order to get the report. David did all the programmatic management and full rush. Okay. So this is basically the team.
Anish.
This is Anish. So Anish did all the graphics editing and whatever you see on the website along with the web page design. Right. We can take questions now, Narika, right?
Yes, we can take questions.
Okay.
Any questions on the research, on any aspects of the research? Please ask away. And
Hi. Hello, Anand, Nadika. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Right.
Radhika, you have
Fantastic
to
work.
probably switch off the fan. Just a minute. Radhika, you have to switch off the fan. I mean, that is probably the background noise from your side.
So, so
Better
no.
now?
So fantastic work. Congratulations. Just one question, actually. As companies grow from from being small, I mean, so they go through this journey, right? Small to medium to large, and when they're going through this journey, they are also probably evolving their security posture, right? They're going and they're probably going to follow some security maturity model, right? Now, why don't you suggest a similar tiered approach to privacy, where they can go through a privacy maturity model, and you're already talking about journeyman documents, so you can have journeyman documents for specific tiers, so it becomes easier for companies to evolve rather than depending on entirely on government and hand holding you throughout your journey.
Okay, so it is not about the government handholding you. So what we just merely coming and telling, two things must be clear is that we are anyway going to do the journeyman documentation. I mean, that is anyway part of the next 1-2 years journey for us. And the data privacy engineering conference is actually a direct result of these findings. So that is the reason why the conference was curated the way in which the talks were curated. It was all finding about this journeyman documentation. And so the next thing but however, there's a thing. What my worry is, but I've not done deep study of the PDP bill. What I'm saying is that the journeyman documentation and what is possible must inform the bill to a certain extent. I mean, that is basically what we are coming and saying. So at the most, if the bill is coming and saying that you have to do something like breach notification, data preserving, I mean, at least put a bunch of references that allow people to go look at it, and not just come back and say this is what you should do. It's never going to happen that way.
Right, I get it. I mean, so my question would be, follow-up question would be, don't you think it'll be easier if the bill also suggests and not mandates certain tiers or certain levels, maturity levels that companies can aspire to achieve?
Okay, I mean, this has not been done in other places, right? I mean, in GDPR compliance, do they actually mandate all that? I don't know.
Not GDPR, but okay, GDPR again has certain leeways when it comes to smaller businesses.
Correct.
But what I'm talking about is, I'm not really talking about just privacy laws. And by the way, GDPR is probably not something that we want to look at, because GDPR itself has a number of issues. The most important being, no one really understands what GDPR is.
Precisely.
I mean,
Precisely.
right? And that's my worry, right? That we are going to do something. We're probably going to cook similar spaghetti structure. We don't want that. What we want is probably real obtainable metrics or even standards at the end of the day.
Okay, so that is what the one of the recommendation is. We have to evolve standards. It's very clear that we said don't give blanket expectations, but at least provide some leeway time and give more guidelines and community help on how to get to those places. So it was not very obviously stated like that. So we're not suggesting any blanket exemptions, but a rollout time with some kind of an evolving standard at every stage.
Right. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions? All right, I will be happy to take questions here or on the Hasgeek privacy page, any which way would work. Marika, do you see any questions? Okay, what if anything surprised? What if anything surprised you about the findings? Interesting question. For me, I think the only thing that I found surprising, I mean, which I probably did not expect, is the one that we had put out earlier, where we said that uh, as companies grow in size, we thought they would have a vibrant peer group to discuss and debate about privacy issues on technology outside their companies. What we found it surprising was that as companies grow bigger, they became insular and they started depending more and more within their own organizations. And so this kind of also comes back to why things are not coming out from the companies. A lot of knowledge about how they are doing certain things is locked in. And the other thing that, so I mean, as a corollary, what surprised me also was that smaller startups relied more on community support for figuring out what is going on with respect to technology on the privacy space compared to bigger organizations. I did not really see that coming when I started off writing the hypothesis. So what it really means is the reason why the recommendation was what it is, in the sense that if smaller and medium organizations are really brought within the ambit of the bill, I think that is going to only happen if a large community initiative is actually put in place by the government. Otherwise, they're going to struggle around a bit. Because as such, even with the IT law compliance or whatever the law compliance, you're depending only on the external community to come and tell them what needs to be done on people, process, and technology. I mean, they have intent. I mean, there's no doubt about it. So that is the only two things that I found pretty surprising about the whole thing. Any other questions? Okay, the next question says, seems like a lot of change is to do with culture or the organization. How can culture change? Less insular, more privacy conscious? So culture is something that that we keep hearing, just not on the survey, but also on the group discussions. Narika, you remember any quotes that you had around that?
Yeah, largely about how uh, culture is both a question of awareness and exposure to these conversations from a starting stage itself, and not just not just after you start in an organization, and things like how some of these things have to be taken at the top, and it doesn't matter if at the at the middle or the junior engineers have these ideas. It needs to percolate from the top, right? So this is something that we heard during our focus group discussions.
Okay, the other thing also just to say how to make them, how to change the culture. Uh, I think regulation helps a bit, but not by a lot, and that is what we found out. Because at the end of it, laws are basically culture coding in the legislative space, or technology is basically a result of that. But we also found regulatory regimes and probably surveying slightly better. So I mean, it's not very, it's a suggestive and indicative, but not really sure. The next question was, could you expand on what you mean by community dependence regarding privacy for smaller entities? Okay, so right. Okay, so let me answer that question. See, if you are a small startup, most of your focus is on getting your product fit and business development done, and figuring out if unit economics works and so on and so on. So if you have an engineering dependence, resource dependence of 100% or 100 engineer, I mean 100% being the top line, you're probably putting every bit of money on that. So large organizations that we have seen have built entire data ecosystems and get data governance practices. Have spent a lot of money on it. We in fact talked to some people just before this meeting came. And the kind of infrastructure you're talking is basically 4 or 5 years of development inside the companies with a lot of custom tunings in place. Most of this is not available for smaller and medium companies. So what they basically do is they basically go to the community, figure out what is happening. Is there an open source product that we use? Is there something that we can get away with doing things very fast? Talk to other practitioners within the community, and mostly consultants which consult for big companies, they depend on them, and so on and so on. So that is what we call as community dependence, because there is no one inside. Their only source of support is basically people who are outside the company. And one way it is basically what we call as a privacy community. Like diversity, equity, children are becoming woke and cool, what would make privacy cool? I don't know, Nadika, you answered this.
For the record, diversity and equity are not just woke and cool items, right? Those are essential for how I think organizations should be. And I think privacy is even more essential, if anything, for these things. And one of the things is what happens with the organizations, and I'm not talking only specifically to the privacy survey, right? Is that the more homogeneous a company is, the worse the products are going to be. The worse the services are going to be. And you need these conversations at all levels for this to move forward, for things to actually have impact. And if you're building products for a very similar set of people, it's just going to take another company to come in and take over your market and offer slightly different services. So I think privacy and these conversations have to start at that. It's more a way of keeping things relevant, keeping things fresh and new, rather than just a woke point, right? It's not just a woke talk point. And how we can make it cool is by doing these things. Keep talking about it at all levels, at every possible opportunity we get, and that's, I think, one of the things that we talk. Build this thing from the ground up. Anand?
Okay, so for me, I will answer the next two questions also similar. The takeaway that privacy will never be a possibility for most and small medium companies given viability. Okay, so here is the technology trend that at least I'm seeing outside of the survey. So we never thought end-to-end encryption was possible before 2010. To be very honest, I never thought end-to-end encryption was possible. At the most, what we had was key storage with centralized key storage, PGP, that kind of stuff. And with Signal coming and with WhatsApp coming, what you've seen is a very arcane technology, which is privacy preserving, has become mainstream. And it is so mainstream that we are seeing a lot of products that are already getting built by small startups, which are taking the technology, giving them libraries. Like one of the things that we saw was by a company called Ocam. They basically have allowed you to create a library that which if you embed and use it can actually make your product privacy preserving with full end-to-end encryption enabled if you're an IoT device seller on day one. So you have to come back and think about it and say, look, how is the ecosystem progressing? So the way in which the ecosystem progresses usually is that first there is a killer product. Then the killer product has a lot of interesting features, and those interesting features then get libraryized. And then those libraries get used often. I mean, we have seen this thing with SaaS companies over and over again. So it's quite possible that maybe in 5 years' time, you would see a lot of products being built on top of these privacy-preserving platforms compared to what you see today. So just like how developers are running REST APIs today and JSON APIs today, and then deploying them in about a day to write code, maybe 5 years down the line, it's going to be so easy. But we just have to be patient. Maybe a year or two, and you'll see all these libraries getting mainstream. So maybe startup that are starting off today may not see it, but maybe things that are going to come that are starting up in 1 or 2 years may see a lot of this coming in. Okay, so they're saying this is like solar power costs becoming cheaper, so it can be personal household purchase, and so it can be like personal household purchase and rural purchase. How do we speed up this process? Interesting question. So I'm not very sure how to speed up this process, because the way in which we have seen open source library development work, the way in which we have seen in the open source world is that first there was GNU Linux, a Linux kernel, which no one knew what the hell it was, and only very few woke people, to use the word, are using it on 1998. And there were officially people who came back and said open source can never make money. But today, if you look at billion-dollar companies, most of them are powered by open source. So what created that was a confluence of technologies and a business cycle downturn in 2001 and 2008, which made on-prem, which basically created the era of cloud with VMware and things like that. It's kind of hard to put which is going to accelerate it, but we can already see some trends. The trend is that a lot of libraries are getting developed, a lot of creative applications are being out there. And so maybe 2 or 3 years down the line, if you keep supporting those creative libraries and companies to do this stuff and give it out for free for other people, you may probably see a Cambrian evolution. I think that's basically the thesis. Suman asks, 93% of the non-authority role, is it? Authority role? Okay. 90%, 93% of the non-authority roles answered correctly compared to 91% of the authority role respondents. While the diff may not be statistically significant, would you like to comment on why this is the case? I mean, I hope we had better statistical differences than 2%, but what we have consistently seen is that people who are on authority roles are recognizing it. I mean, they're saying that we want it. How much of that has propagated down depends on a whole variety of things. But it certainly seems to me that people who are in authority roles, who basically think these regulations are coming and who are probably responsible for forward planning, understand the value of privacy far better than people who are at the end of the end of the pipeline.
No, so exactly. So this is my. So this was the question. So, don't you think we should have seen more people in authority roles answering correctly? So what we have here is basically people who are not in authority roles have answered correctly. More people, right?
Yeah, I know, but unfortunately, it is what it is. I mean, I am not able to figure out what was the reason, because it is mostly self-answered,
Right.
and mostly self-answered, and we didn't say why are you saying like that.
No. I'm saying this was something that struck me as surprising.
Yeah, I mean, I would have probably expected it, but to be very honest, I expected only an overall percentage of about 65% when I started the survey.
Okay.
So anything more than that, as it is today, for me is actually quite happy in comparison to what I'm seeing.
Okay.
Okay, so now the next question is, who supports these companies and collaborators? Who supports these companies and collaborators? So this is like asking who's supporting the development of Linux. I mean, there is a Linux Foundation, which which all the companies go and give money to, and the foundation basically gives out, develops Linux kernel and all the associated products with it. So I think there is a very clear established model in open source about how products get developed and how technologies get developed. Like for instance, you just look at Signal. I mean, it was completely a non-profit model, 5013 non-profit, and yet their products now run in a billion machines, and people are quite surprised about how well it runs because it's so seamless. So mostly it is funded by donors, big companies. So Signal is one of those examples, but it is funded without getting anything in return. But there are also examples where companies got spun out because there was a business model that came out of it, like Docker, for instance, and the entire Kubernetes. For instance, Kubernetes was spun out of an internal Google product, which was spun out for the whole world. It created a whole bunch of new paradigms. And Docker, for instance, was venture capitalist funded. So I think you'll see a spectrum of funding for these products, some from nonprofits, some from venture capitalists, and from some big techs, which are basically spin-offs. I think all these things is what we have seen in the open source industry. Okay, the next question was, how does Hasgeek see its role in the process of privacy improvement in tech startups? Okay, interesting question. Kiran, if you're around, can you answer that? Or Zainab, if you're around, you can answer that. That how we are always a community-oriented company, and what has been the original mission, and how this is one of the things that we are always wanted to do.
Can you repeat the question, Anand?
How does Hasgeek see its role in the process of privacy improvement in tech startups?
So what we do is essentially create community spaces in which companies can come and talk to each other and make them safe spaces in which a discussion can happen. And I think that will be our role in privacy mode as well. That as companies discover what works for privacy or what doesn't work for privacy, they'll need a place to document these learnings that is somewhat safe because it is only consisting of their peers. And that's the space that we're going to provide. In our case, we're also going beyond having people coming and talk to then having it written down and turned into a guide that others can consume. And so hopefully we'll be doing a lot more of that. That will be written documentation that is more of an implementation guide than just somebody explaining what they've learned. So I think that's roughly it. That's basically what we're going to focus on.
Okay, a follow-up question, Kiran. When companies are becoming insular, will this work?
So this is, I guess, the harder challenge. How do you get companies to come out and talk to each other? And I think this is not going to be an easy thing. See, you don't fix this kind of problem by providing a service and saying that here is a website where you can come and talk. That's not going to change the fact that people don't feel comfortable talking because the companies don't encourage it. And I think this is going to be a more of a community effort than something Hasgeek as an organization can do. But rather, you and me as individuals who are invested in getting people to come out and speak have to be the evangelists that get it to happen despite the fact that company culture says it should not happen. Yeah? And that cultural mission is a harder problem and a longer problem than just producing guides. But that's something that we'll have to do as well.
Okay. Kiran, how do we change culture?
I honestly don't know. It's not like there's an easy guide to this. It is something that we'll learn as we try and see what happens when our ideas work or fail.
Okay, in this a shameless plug, he did the Save the Internet. So that was a cultural moment. That was called as a cultural moment in India. So sometimes these random luck things do happen. Okay, so the next question was, do you believe that organizational structures will be forced to change in the future due to the importance placed due to privacy? Well, it is already changing, or it is already changed in certain levels, at least the big ones. Because if you see there, I mean, we had some of those responses, right, Narika, which is how many people have their legal and compliance officer vetoing product decisions. Quite a few of them said they do. Right?
Yeah, we can pull up the number in a minute, but yeah, a fair number of people said they have organization place at least some recognized person in the organization who looked after risks and compliance
and they have some veto rights over product development. I mean, obviously, veto is a very big power, and so it is not often used. But the very fact that there are those structures in place are telling you, in some level, that things are evolving and things are changing, which was not the case before. Some of them may or may not have a chief data officer or chief privacy officer. But they do have some process, and most of the companies have come back and said we have some processes in place, and of course we want to do more, but we are largely in alignment with our peers. So most of them are saying that we want to do more, but we're also in alignment with your peers, which kind of tells you that they all want to evolve. So that itself is a very clear intent statement, apart from the fact that they also come and tell you that there is some veto power given to certain people in the organization when it comes to making privacy decisions. They can really do a stop ship product kind of thing.
Yeah, just to answer, I think we had about 100 plus companies saying they have a chief data officer or a person in charge of privacy risks and compliance, and a minimum size of 1 to 5 seem to be 1 to 5 members in a team that's looking after compliance. So we can see that happening across, but obviously this has to be built up, and standard operating procedures and playbooks have to be put in place, and that's a conversation for the longer run, right?
Do you feel the survey would get the same result outside India? Well, hard question. My gut feel is that we would get a different response outside India. but that is just my gut feel. They're asking different in what way? Okay, so this again goes back to at least culturally what I've seen. Most of the companies which are outside India, if we refer to the US, UK, EU regimes, at least they have some, just not the intent created by the GDPR. The cultural thing is also people who want to do the right thing. And while some may always take shortcuts, there is plenty of community support around how to do things right. So there is that external peer pressure of other companies doing right that forces some of these companies, to get, to do things rightly. Obviously, if I had taken this survey in China, the answer would be different because we know for a fact that in China, there is no such thing as privacy. Everything belongs to the CCP. So that basically explains why I think the survey would produce different responses in different countries. At the end of it, it is simply the cultural regime in the country that dictates how people look at it. Even though there may or may not be law around it, I think the sheer cultural pressure would force companies to do certain things correctly. Very interesting. Which companies in India will be the first movers? The good peers, as you said, yes. Most of the companies that have cracked the privacy puzzle in other geographies and in areas where they built up significant practice would be the first movers. And if they share what they are doing correctly with the community, I think they have good potential to go into many different geographies and set up their business. That is one of the reasons why they did what they did. They put in significant amount of investment for 4 or 5 years to create data access layers and data protocols, classification engines, all proprietary stuff, which they're not coming telling how they got it implemented. In order to ensure no matter they go, they are privacy compliant on day one without any effort. So it is an investment that they have made, knowing very well that it just allows them to jump into a different market and start running on day one. Okay, any more questions? Oh, do you see value in running a similar survey which includes sectors such as manufacturing, ONG, pharma, etc.? Well, running a survey and discerning the question is the easy part. Getting them to answer is the hard part. Okay, as we already know. Of course, we want to run it and see what is going on there. But getting correct answers on the survey is a hard problem. And I'll tell you why I'm reasonably confident why that didn't happen for Hasgeek, at least the ones who responded. Because if you look at it, this company is about 10 years old. And it has built a long cultural capital, to use the word culture again, within the community to be a safe space to come and talk about stuff. Okay. And there are all kinds of things that we know of and we talk about in the Birds of Feather session. And so that trust capital and the trust is always there. So most of the responses that we got, we know for sure are the right responses, even though they are self-reported, because we know these people and these companies who come and talk here often. Well, do we know for a fact that we can get such similar good responses in other sectors that we are not interacted with? I don't know, to be honest. But do I see value in it? Yes. There is definitely going to be value in it because for the simple reason that, like it or not, all companies are becoming data monoliths, not monopolies, but data monoliths. There is not a single company out there that is not dealing in data anymore. Very few companies are outside the spectrum. So yes, I do see a value in it. But would I want to run it? That's a different answer. Okay, which are some companies you recommend in India that other companies can look to for advice? Well, I can't share what was told to us in confidence on the privacy survey, But you are free to look up all the companies which came and talked in the data privacy conference because they cleared a very high editorial bar that I had set out by saying that unless until you have some interesting thing that I've not heard before, I'm not going to select you. So if you're really looking for companies that are determining the bar, please look at the companies which allow their speakers to come and talk in the data privacy conference. And so in general, apart from our business being data conferences, in general, we generally like companies which allow their speakers to come and talk about their work or what is happening inside anywhere else in any conference. That is a sign of a good mature company. Okay. Any more questions? All right. Zanab, do you want to do some closing remarks? If there's no other questions. Okay. If there are no more questions, I think we can close the room. And anyway, for those who wants to know more about it, the research that is there in the link, you can read through it, leave questions, comments. We are free to answer. We will answer them as we go forward in the time. And this is not going to be the last time we're doing data privacy conference or the survey. It's going to run in multiple forms over the next 1 year with support from OBDR networks.
And the link for the report is up on the chat, and we'll share it out soon. We'll tweet about it, so please join in, giving your feedback on the report itself, and we can build the conversation there also.
All right. If there are no more questions, we are done. All right. Thank you, Rashmin. We can close the time.